Yeah, just here getting the wood heater going to help warm the place up a bit so I can paint the first half of the super dish framing. I want to talk about the fuel-air ratio theory I have in regards to wood. Now, many people see wood as just, oh, it burns, that's it, full stop. I sort of look at it a little bit deeper. I've seen a number of bizarre things, essentially probably much the same as what you'd expect to see inside a gasifier happen in wood stoves and wood heaters and things like that. Had a few experiences over the years with the wood-fired equipment I've got at my place. Those of you who have driven diesels, not so much the newer ones that are rather high-tech, but some of the older ones, you know, back in the 80s and whatnot, and earlier than that, you'll know with the diesel, when you tramp the foot, you know, when you put the pedal to the metal, it tends to blow a lot of black smoke. And basically it's putting in more diesel than it sort of is ready to take going on the speed of the engine. But that's, you know, its way of accelerating is to, you know, put more diesel in and make a richer mix, which usually ends up burning with a lot of smoke. Now, if you've ever had anything to do with blowtorches, as I did when I was working at Air Radiators, I used to do soldering with a blowtorch. If there are any leaks, you know, after the initial fuse to header TIG welding and the what they call the back bonding, where they basically get a whole ton of solder down the back. Sometimes there'd still be leaks, and of course I spent a lot of time on the initial leak testing tank that they, you know, test the cores on. And then they do a second test after they bolt the whole, the final, you know, tanks on and all the other fittings and whatnot. But basically, with that, you could play around with the fuel and air mixture settings on that. And if you turn it up, there'd be a lot of smoke, black smoke coming out. And if you turn the oxygen up, then the black smoke would go. In many respects, the same way the blowtorches work like that was a propane / oxygen blowtorch, and the way diesels work in many respects are like wood stoves and wood heaters. And basically, I'll go outside for a second. I don't know if I'll get it on camera, but I'll show you. Right now the smoke should be black because it's only starting initially. Yeah, you can't really see it because the fire's only rather small, but you know, there's not much fuel in it at the moment. It's only just got going, and the wind's going pretty hard, so it's blowing it away rather quickly. But basically there's black smoke coming out there. Now basically when you start these, there's always black smoke. And those of you who are not terribly familiar with wood heaters and wood stoves may have seen videos of rocket stoves with inner city greenies bragging that there's no smoke coming out the rocket stove. Well, that's actually kind of normal. Within 5 to 10 minutes, this thing will stop blowing black smoke. And my theory is that basically the amount of air that's being let in with your vents and all that stuff, and with the fire inside, the fire has sort of basically cut itself back to only run at the rate of the air that's allowed in there. And it's sort of met its own equilibrium based on whatever you've set the air intake vents at, or as the proper name is, the damper at. And, you know, it'll start to burn clear. And that's usually what I'm seeing is when I go outside to get more wood for a wood heater, if I, walk right out to one of the wood stacks or whatever, I'll be seeing nothing but heat waves coming out. And then when you reload it, 5 or 10 minutes later, usually only 5 minutes sort of pretty obviously, and then 10 minutes there's still a little wisp of black, and then after that it's back to being clear again. And that's sort of, it's just it getting to equilibrium again, and off you go again. And basically when you have a rocket stove, I assume most of you know a bit about it, but for those of you who don't, for those of you who just use old wood heaters and basic stuff that's commercially available in Australia, which rocket stoves sort of aren't, with a rocket stove you have a piece of wood, much like this bit of construction wood or whatever, and there's actually a ramp, and you don't really need to cut the wood at all, in fact. There's what they call a feed ramp, which is basically a few bits of rod that go across, bump, 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 and the wood will sit on that. And that's actually outside the stove. And then as you push it in, the wood is burning in mid-air. It's not sitting on a piece of steel, unlike the inside of this. It's actually burning in mid-air. And because of that, it's got more access to oxygen, and it's more likely to burn with a cleaner flame as a result. But because this has got a steel bottom and whatnot, it doesn't get quite as good an airflow, therefore it tends to burn a little bit richer, when you chuck more wood in, and as a result you get the black smoke, whereas with a rocket stove you won't. The other thing with a rocket stove is you can have a big, long piece of wood, long as this bit here. It actually goes right around the corner of the bin there. And you're only feeding in the same piece. So you're sort of not really having the fire die down and then reload it, and then it sort of fires up a bit, and then sort of as time goes on, an hour later it sort of burns out. You've got a consistent rate of flame, and basically what happens is this will burn, and it'll burn along there. And then what you've got to do is you've got to grab hold of where it is on the feed ramp and slide it up the ramp a bit to get it back inside the stove more if it starts burning too close to the front, and obviously the heat's coming out the front where the wood goes in, as opposed to going up through your flue, so to speak, and heating up your pots and whatever. But basically, because you're not sort of putting in wood batch by batch, it's just the same piece continuously, you're not going to go through that change in sort of fuel to air mix by suddenly adding a great heap extra fuel, And I think that's a lot to do with it. When you're throwing a heap of wood, all of a sudden you've got so much more fuel in the fire, and once again you've got more fuel than you've got air coming in through the damper, and it goes black again. Of course, with things like creosote and whatnot, you sort of can't help that things are going to go, black, especially with your sappy crapo wood, or your stuff that's, something's a bit amiss with it, too full of sap, going a bit rotten, or, some other thing had a bug get in and disease it and sort of mottle up all the wood, or whatever. Of course, in those situations, it's sort of almost unavoidable that you've got to get a bit of smoke anyway. But there's something else I want to mention while we're on the subject. I sort of more or less, can read a fire by the smoke coming off it, and your colour of the smoke has a lot to do with things as well. And long story short, especially if you've been over in England, you may see this. Your smoke may be coming out black, or it may come out grey, and in some cases it'll come out white. And I have seen that. I've seen it come out very white looking. That's the water in the wood. If you've had wood outside and it's got wet, or, you know, it's been cut sort of a little bit too late and it's still a bit green on it and hasn't really had a chance to dry out in the hot weather, your smoke will actually be more white than black. And that's not something to worry about, because that's not smoke, that's actually steam. And so, you know, it's no big deal. One of the tricks they tend to do in the media is fly over the cooling towers of a power station, you know, and they're basically where the steam pipes come out of the steam turbine generators in the power plant, and they get cooled, and the water in those or whatever fluid they're running gets cooled, and what happens is they get cooled inside a big tower with all these water sprayers spraying down on them. And I've actually got a book with a photo of someone walking through the insides of one of these cooling towers, and there's a lot of steam, and it's all steam pouring up. And then the media will fly over with a helicopter and say, "Oh, look at all the smoke, look at all the pollution." No, you idiots, it's steam. Of course, with these power stations, they're being designed very well, and it's basically running at optimum fuel air mix the whole time. In actual fact, they actually grind the coal to powder like a coal flour and basically blow it into the air with blowers and then light it midway in the middle of the year. Now, while we're on this, I might as well talk about some other bizarre things I've noticed with a fire. You wouldn't believe this one. I picked this one up recently, literally only about 2 days ago, and I've done it before when you stick in fire lighters. Where are they? These things here. You know, the old, I might as well get them out. Oh, yeah. You know, white tubes. When you stick those in on red hot coals, because I often come back to a fire and it's not completely out, there'll be a few red coals in the bottom. Of course, there'll be steam coming off those, and it's like the kerosene or the shallot or whatever that's coming out of it. And what I've realised quite obviously is you just light a little match and ka-woof, it lights it all up. And I've been playing around a bit recently, and sometimes I have coals in there, and I go and get a whole heap of split floorboards, and I throw in the bottom, you know, where your red coals are down there. There'll only be a handful of those in amongst the ash, but there's enough to get the fire going again. If you get little bits like split floorboards, I think that's actually I know that's out of a chest of drawers that were very old and made completely out of real wood. But you get little bits like that, and you lay them on top of the red coals, and then they'll start smoking. And if you blow them for a while, they may light up. But sometimes you can blow and blow and blow and blow, and they don't want to light up. It'll work something out. The smoke coming off that is essentially like wood gas. Now, sometimes when you read stuff about wood gasifiers, they'll talk about, you know, and some people in wood gasifier videos will say, "Oh yeah, that's the smoke, and the smoke's coming through there, and then we cool it through the radiator system, and then we put it through a filter, and then we, you know, feed that through into the feed it through into the engine, blah 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 blah." And they refer to it as smoke as opposed to wood gas. And I've thrown in bits like that and seen smoke coming off them, and I thought, I'm blowing and I'm blowing, I'm thinking, light up, you bastards. They keep blowing, they don't light, so I think, bugger it. So I've realised I can get a match, and it's essentially wood gas coming off them, and I get a match and I hold it up near the smoke and nothing will happen. And then once I get within about half an inch or so, woof, the whole lot will flip and light up, and it'll be off. Much the same way as the steam coming off these sitting in coals. When these start to smoke, if you're blowing them and they don't want to light, you can actually get a match and put it just above where the smoke's coming off, and because the smoke is essentially wood gas, it'll light it up. That's something rather bizarre that I've been playing with the last couple of days, and it works. The other one I should mention, oh yes, yeah, At times, not in this wood heater, but the other one that I've got in my bedroom, because this one isn't actually mine, I have had big lumps of wood, decent lemon logs, probably bigger than any of that stuff sitting there anyway. And some of it's been really large, and I've set it in the bottom, and as time goes on, it either rolls itself backwards and snuffs itself out, or something stupid, because with the one I've got at home, there's no air vents through the bottom, and I mean, there's only very small air vents through this one, because we've got an ashtray in the bottom. But mine, it's just firebricks in the bottom, and, you get these logs, and they're perfectly round, and they roll over and snuff themselves out, or they've got a flat bottom, and they snuff themselves out. But what I tend to notice is, I might look in there and try and blow it and get it going again, and it doesn't want to get going. I just said, so what? It's not that cold a night, so I just end up going back to bed, and I sort of get up the next morning, and there's an entire block of charcoal sitting in there. And what's basically happened is it's gone out, but it's still been red coals. And those red coals have stayed hot, but with a convection drawer, and some people don't quite understand how good convection drawer is. You want to know what convection drawer is like, go close your windows and your doors, light a bit of incense. You tell me what way the smoke goes. That's only a tiny little ember on the end of that incense, but the smoke goes straight up. There is, with some of these, especially with my wood heater at home, it almost gets a whole, and especially the wood stove I've got, it gets a whole blooming flow happening. It'll suck in through the front, and it's basically the convection drawer is so strong going up through the stovepipe that basically it'll maintain a constant sucking through the damper, just because it's got this flow going because of the convection drawer up the stovepipe. And what will end up happening is this block of wood will stay in there with red hot coals, but never actually relight. But the convection drawer will keep the air sucking through and going out through the chimney, and while the stove isn't very hot at all, the stovepipe's still got a fair bit of warmth to it. And it's not really heating up the room, not a great amount, but you wake up the next morning and there's just this giant block of charcoal in there, and you can poke it with, your tongs or whatever, and it'll just sort of fall to bits. And sometimes it's still red, and sometimes, when I get back from work, it's there and it's completely stopped. There's no red coals at all on it, but it's just this big block of charcoal. And I worked out what's basically happened is, it's almost running like a gasifier, in the fact that the hot coals and the smoke, or more or less the wood gas coming off it, keeps drawing up the chimney with convection drawer, and it keeps sucking air through, and effectively it acts like a gasifier, and you've got all this wood gas sort of coming out your chimney, which brings me to something else. Some of the good wood heaters, like, the expensive ones that are quite well built, they actually have afterburners, and they have a glow plug-like thing somewhere in the back near where it goes up into the stovepipe, and that glow plug will obviously get hot. But if there's any unignited wood gas or whatever still going up through the stovepipe, this glow plug will ignite it, and that gives you extra heat. And some of the fancy designs that I have seen that are very overpriced in a particular shop, which I'd done a bit of stealth video in quite a while back in Firewood the Forgotten Fuels, they had it. It's sort of hard to explain. They have a way where basically they go and suck some of the smoke from, it sort of draws out the smoke from near where it goes up the stovepipe and feeds it back through right above where the air vents are. So the air sucking through using the Venturi effect will suck some of the smoke back through the fire. and in case some of that smoke wasn't ignited, some of it has a chance to get ignited a second time by running back through this system. But they had it set up a certain way with certain angles and whatnot, so that if it was sort of, not going up the stovepipe, then it was sort of almost forced to come back through right near where the dampers were, and then Venturi effect would sort of draw it through. If you don't know what the Venturi effect is, it's sort of it's much the same way as your propane camping stoves draw oxygen in to the mixer/burner, and it's the same way carburetors work to draw the petrol fumes onto the air as it goes before it goes into the intake manifold, and that's sort of where you got one thing flowing fast and it'll naturally suck another thing beside it along with it. But yeah, it's it's an interesting concept. When things burn, people just think you just stick a match on it and that's it. I've seen quite a number of my logs where they're burning and it's not the actual log burning, there's actually about a half-inch gap and there's flames floating half an inch above the whole log, and that happens on a very regular basis when I see that. But it's not like people think where there's just, you light a match and it burns. There's about 6 or 7 processes that are occurring in a flame, and one of those is obviously pyrolysis, whereby, that's basically how gasifiers run, where there's no actual flame, but there's still, I believe, they sort of run, I'm not sure on this, but I think they basically run with a whole heap of red coals that just keep glowing away or whatever, and there's no actual flame in there, but they've only got to about process 3 or 4 and then fed it into the engine, and the vehicle actually burns it properly. But yeah, it's not a simple thing when you look into the technicalities of it. There are quite a number of things. There's 6 or 7 different things that happen just with a simple piece of wood burning. So anyway, that's my little insights into the fuel-air mixture theory and some of the other funny bits and pieces for those of you who wanted to hear a rather technical explanation of my beliefs and observations.